Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. I'm Jenna Ellis. Join me tonight on Jenna Ellis Tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. We are going to break down the debate preview. So Donald Trump versus Joe Biden yet again, and RFK Jr. not qualifying under CNN's rules. So what should we expect from the debate? Our political panel will join us. We also have our legal eagles tonight talking about the Supreme Court taking up a very important case next term on the red states that are implementing protections for minors against this so-called gender-affirming care surgery. We all know that that is a ridiculous leftist myth. So is the Supreme Court indicating that it is likely to hold an opinion based on federalism, that yes, states actually have the power to protect children in red states? All this and more tonight on Jenna Ellis Tonight on the Salem News Channel. My fellow Americans, we are experiencing instability at every level. Our government lacks leadership, and Bidenomics has been an absolute disaster. The economy is in a fragile state. Inflation has been a consistent issue, and high interest rates have put significant pressure on the real estate market. There have been major bank failures, and many analysts say a stock market correction is likely overdue. We have global conflicts in Europe and the Middle East that have the potential to spread, but gold has soared to record highs even amid the tensions. There are so many reasons that Americans just like you and me should consider investments in gold and silver, and Legacy Precious Metals is the gold standard. I love Legacy Precious Metals because of their zero hassle, education first approach. They can help you roll your traditional IRA into a gold IRA or ship metals directly to your house. Go to legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com to download their free gold investing guide. I've read it, and there is so much valuable information there. Friends, now is not the time to roll the dice with your hard-earned money. Find out about the growth potential that gold offers you. Contact Legacy Precious Metals today and tell them that I sent you. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So the Supreme Court, as of this morning, has decided to take up the issue of whether or not red states can ban so-called transgender surgeries on minors. So this headline coming from CNN, the Supreme Court to decide whether states can restrict so-called gender-affirming care for minors. The Supreme Court on Monday agreed to hear the Biden administration's challenge to a transgender care ban in Tennessee, delving into the complicated and politically fraught issue of so-called gender-affirming care in a substantive way for the first time. And you see how headlines, of course, like this one being from CNN, are very biased, and that they put this term gender-affirming care in there to skew what people think. But continuing, so CNN says the state law enacted last year bans hormone therapy and puberty blockers for minors and imposes civil penalties for doctors who violate the prohibitions. It is among a growing number of state laws enacted in recent years targeting transgender care. Nearly half of U.S. states have enacted bans on transgender care for minors, according to the Human Rights Campaign. The case will be heard this fall. So let's welcome in now our legal eagles. Joining me now is Mike Donnelly, who is an attorney and law professor, and Ron Coleman, who is the host of the Coleman Nation podcast and also an attorney with the Dillon Law Group. So, Mike, let's start with you. I mean, obviously, CNN, other leftist outlets are going to be so concerned that there are states that are banning this so-called gender-affirming care, but this is all about the right of states to actually protect children and say, no, I'm sorry, doctors, you cannot mutilate children's bodies under this ridiculous theory that gender-affirming care is even a thing. So where do you think the Supreme Court stands on this in terms of choosing to address this issue now?
Big shocker, CNN trying to spin the news, right? First of all, this is not the Biden administration's lawsuit. This was a lawsuit filed by a group of people who call themselves parents, who want to be able to have these well, I won't call them treatments because that's not what they are. This kind of experimentation happen on kids that they're custodians for. But the Biden administration did intervene, and so they're carrying it forward, and that's significant. This is a challenge to two laws in Kentucky and Tennessee that banned, so-called banned, and I don't even like to use that term, but we'll have to come up with another one as well. Because what it is doing is it's protecting children from experimental, scientific experimentation, I guess is a way you could put it. The media likes to use the term gender-affirming. And care. It's not affirming and it's not care. It's discouraging. It's constructionist, and it's not care. These treatments go against the core of the person, the child. Children are born men or women, boys or girls. That's what they are. And these activists want to be able to have children choose their gender, and that's not something that children should be able to do. And so Kentucky and Tennessee, like other states, have stepped in and said, these treatments are experimental. We are not going to allow this on children. And that's the right thing to do. And I think Jeff Sutton, who wrote the Sixth Circuit opinion on this, got it exactly right. And when it's my turn next, because we got to let Ron chime in here, I've got a quote from Jeff Sutton.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Ron, this all boils down, I think, to federalism, because the people, through their elected representatives in these states, decided that they wanted to protect children in this manner. And of course, the Human Rights Campaign and the leftists and others are pushing back. But shouldn't the court decide this on the basis of federalism and say, yeah, absolutely, the states within their power have the constitutional and legal prerogative to implement this kind of protection?
Absolutely. It is a federalism issue. They're not going to rule on whether or not these are good treatments or bad treatments. They should, but they won't. What they may do, though, is shave a little bit off Obergefell, because Obergefell was a gigantic loss for federalism in the sexual cultural revolution context. And Obergefell will have to be cited at the very least. And anything that can be, I don't see them using this as an opportunity to reverse Obergefell. I don't think this is that case. I don't know if that is ever going to happen, but that's where the battle is. It's a federalism battle, and it's quite surprising that the Biden administration, which, as Mike pointed out, is carrying the water here, did file for cert here, because as of now, it's only a Sixth Circuit problem. I think they're about to find themselves with a national problem.
Yeah, and this is very interesting heading into the election. The Biden administration would choose to be the face of this suit. But Mike, before we get to the judge's quote, which I know that you'll bring up in this segment, the question for you as well is whether or not the Biden administration are basically leaning in to their hardcore extreme leftist policies. And look at this appointment of Tyler Cherry, this new assistant communications director that is openly queer, openly pro-BLM, anti-ICE, pro-Pride, everything absolutely crazy leftist. And Biden doesn't seem to care about November, at least. By Biden, I mean, all of the people in his administration that are clearly making a lot of these decisions, maybe even without his knowledge.
Well, it was a little surprising to me, and I did see that on X platform, and I looked at it and I was like, wow, that's troubling. He repudiated, apparently. Well, it appears that way. Tyler Cherry apparently repudiated some of his past, but it is a very striking and troubling past. And, it does appear that the Biden administration is leaning into this. And I think that only helps Trump. I think people are not okay with that. I think the American people, are going to see a clear choice. And when Biden is appointing people like this to be on his team, people know where he stands.
Yeah, and go ahead and give the judge's quote, if you will, so that people know what you're referring to.
Oh, thank you, Jenna. I appreciate that. So Jeff Sutton, who, by the way, I think Jeff Sutton should be on Trump's list of Supreme Court nominees. I think Jeff Sutton, he's Chief Judge of the Sixth Circuit, is very good, and this opinion is excellent. He says, question after question arises under the plaintiff's approach, which is to treat this as an equal protection problem. And answer after answer confirms that expert consensus, whether in the medical profession or elsewhere, is not the North Star of substantive due process, lest judges become spectators rather than referees in construing our Constitution. Basically, what he's pointing out is that, you know, the pro people here, the Biden administration and the people, the Human Rights Campaign, want to say, oh, look at the experts. They say this is okay. Look at WPATH and look at the 20 years of medical experimentation that has been going on. That makes it okay. And Jeff Sutton says, no, it doesn't. This is something that legislators need to be concerned about. And he's saying that legislators in the states have been regulating medical treatment for many, many years. It's a legitimate state interest. This is not a suspect class, which the Biden administration cited in their briefs. They said, oh, transgender status is a quasi-suspect class, or, you know, sex, it should be treated with heightened scrutiny because we're talking about sex here. No, Jeff Sutton got it exactly right. And let's put him on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, Ron, this is an indication by the Supreme Court taking up this case that it's an indication that they are going to hold in favor of federalism, and they are going to issue an opinion from a conservative majority that is very strong. I would love to see Obergefell overturned. And regardless of whether anyone, where anyone stands on the issue of so-called same-sex marriage as a Christian, I think it's absolutely preposterous that we are using the term marriage for this type of obviously sexually deviant behavior. But for the government to actually call it that and to go so far outside the bounds of federalism is the main problem. And so where do we think that the Supreme Court is going to end up on this when they hear this case in the fall?
I agree with you 100%, Jenna. The signal seems to be, oh, Biden administration, you want us to decide? We'll decide.
Yeah. And I hope that it's a very strong majority. And so, Mike,
it'll be 6-3.
Where do we expect? You think? Yeah, you think it'll be 6-3? And so, okay, so for the liberal justices, this is always my question. How do they, I mean, we know how they get away with it, but how do they, with their oath of office, actually contort themselves into pretzels, Ron, so much that they are willing to issue opinions that are so divorced from the original text of the Constitution? I mean, how do they sleep at night doing that?
Well, since Brennan and Marshall, Thurgood Marshall, that is, what we've seen is that even being on the Supreme Court doesn't prevent, in fact, may even encourage judges with a leftist orientation to ignore legal analysis and say, but what's the thing we really want to have happen here? It's really an emergency. It's really people. It's really you'll always hear Sotomayor talking about this decision disregards the effect on hundreds of, whether it's immigrants or whatever the case, or thousands of. That's not the Supreme Court's job. The Supreme Court's job is to construe statutes and the Constitution. Policymakers are the ones who are supposed to make decisions about the effects on people, unless it's in an injunction, posture, which is not here. So that's how they rationalize it, and it's sort of a bit of demagoguery, but I don't think they're doing it as demagogues. I think that's really how they think that these cases should be decided, based on what feels good to them.
Right. And that's really the concern, is that this is so emotionally based often when you get into judicial activism instead of substantively based in the U.S. Constitution. And this is why we need more and more Federalist judges. But I'm going to hold over my Legal Eagle panel to the next segment so that we can continue talking about the Supreme Court and the cases that still need to be decided. I mean, we are almost to the end of June, and there are a number of cases, including the President Trump immunity case, that have yet to be issued by the U.S. Supreme Court. So we're going to talk about all that and more coming up next. Stay tuned. Big tech, big government, and the progressives have done everything they can to silence truth and sanity. But there's a secret weapon that they can't touch. 1 year ago, a new streaming platform, The Real Life Network, was launched to provide a desperate world with much needed programming, free from the overreach of government and media. Go to reallifenetwork.com and subscribe for free. And when you do, you'll receive an ebook, Countdown, God's Ultimate Endgame, as their way of saying thank you for Pastor Jack Hibbs. When you sign up, you'll have unlimited access to 100 programmers who deliver outstanding, truth-filled, hopeful entertainment for the whole family. I'm proud to be among them, as you can find Jenna Ellis Tonight and several of my interviews on Real Life Network. Subscribe now at reallifenetwork.com and get a free digital download of Countdown, a book from Real Life Network founder, Pastor Jack Hibbs. That's reallifenetwork.com for your free ebook and access to amazing content today. Let's welcome back our legal eagles, Mike Donnelly and Ron Coleman. And so, gentlemen, there are still a number of cases that the Supreme Court has yet to issue their opinions on, and we are very late in June. But they did issue an opinion last week in a very pivotal Second Amendment case. It was 8-1, Justice Thomas being the lone dissenter in the United States versus Rahimi case. And there was a lot of substantive talk back and forth on social media that was criticizing Thomas and saying, look, he's the far right-wing extremist. This was my take on social media, and you guys can tell me whether you agree with it or not. But I said, I've read the majority opinion and the dissent in U.S. v. Rahimi, and predictably, most of the anti-Thomas reaction completely missed his point if they bothered to actually read it at all. The majority was concerned with presumptively lawful federal regulation of firearms under the federal statute targeting quote-unquote dangerous persons framework without concerning itself with the all-important underlying question whether civil protection orders are abusive of rights guarantees, including arms, particularly when deprivation of rights is automatic under that framework. Thomas was rightly concerned with the Constitution's guarantees, due process in dicta, and the burden on the government, and therefore correctly rejected the presumption of lawful regulation when, quote, the government does not offer a single historical regulation that is relevantly similar. So, Ron Coleman, what do you think?
I think this is a super perfect example of what we learned in law school, which is that hard cases make bad law. This is a really hard case. This guy apparently is a really nasty guy. And we've got an 8-1 decision here. Thomas raises important issues, but he raised them in a case where there was no way that everyone wasn't going to try to establish his bona fides. Everyone except Thomas, who was not interested in establishing his bona fides with anyone, as a reasonable jurist on the issue of gun control. So, yes, I think your tweet is on the nose, but I'm not even sure that the question of the constitutionality of civil protection orders was really teed up appropriately in this case anyway. I'm not claiming to be intimately familiar with the briefing, but it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, and Mike, I think that Ron raises a really good point, and the end of that tweet also said, I get why there are a lot of people who are very concerned about a person like Rahimi if you read the facts of this case, this was a guy who clearly, in my view, have very serious questions about whether someone like this should be able to possess a firearm. But this case isn't just about him. It has a much wider precedential value. And that's where I think Thomas was getting to in his opinion, to say, we shouldn't just presume that when you have civil protection orders that are often very one-sided, you have to, as a defendant, prove your ability to exercise your rights, including possession of firearms. That's inverted in terms of due process. There are so many complications in this case, but it shouldn't have just been about this one person. It should have been, as Thomas rightly said, about the federal statute itself.
It should have been about the federal statute, and the federal statute should not exist. The federal government has no place dealing with this issue. This is a state issue. The Second Amendment says Congress has no role in gun control. The Supreme Court just in 2010 decided it did, and it should not have. Now, that was Scalia, and he was trying to be consistent with the court's incorporation doctrine and its substantive due process. Hopefully, as Clarence Thomas, I think, wants to get us to a place where we grapple with substantive due process, which is fundamentally and inherently against the way we should be ruling ourselves as Americans. Our state policymakers should be ruling on these issues, and they have. We should not be letting federal prosecutors bring these cases to federal court. The federal government should not be regulating gun control. We talked about this also last week or week before on the Hunter Biden issue, and I said, why is Hunter Biden in federal court over gun charges? These should be state charges, not federal charges. So good for Clarence Thomas. And he hasn't been a lone dissenter in that many cases. So, the media just doesn't like Thomas.
Of course. I mean, they're going to take every opportunity to slam him as some kind of far-right extremist when he was the only one actually concerned about the text of the law and the Constitution and applying it to the Second Amendment here. But let's switch gears in just the last few minutes that we have with both of you to talk about the cases that haven't been decided. Ron, I'm frankly a little bit surprised that the Supreme Court hasn't yet issued their ruling in the presidential immunity case. It looks like they're going to wait for the very last day because this one is so politically charged, but it really shouldn't be that controversial. I think it's going to be remanded back down to the lower court to kind of decide and parse the issues and say, yes, some acts are covered by presidential immunity, some in his personal capacity or in the capacity of a campaign candidate. Those are not covered by presidential immunity. So it's really not going to be quite as controversial, at least in terms of being one-sided, where the court, at least if they go this route, would look political one way or another. What do you think?
Well, Jenna, that would be the case. Everything you're saying is correct, but activists don't read opinions and parse them out that way. Just as we were saying that, whatever Thomas does, it will be pinned on him as some benighted right-wing view. If the Supreme Court doesn't say that unlike every other federal employee, the President of the United States has no immunity, it's going to be considered to be some kind of right-wing coup and let's pack the court. And they're going to explode regardless of how nuanced and how shaded and how many dissents there are. That's just how they roll. And that's why they put fences up around the Supreme Court. Imagine that's the world we're living in.
That which is so crazy. I mean, these people should be able to do their job. I mean, even if there are opinions that I disagree with, and there are plenty, we should still at least respect the process. But Mike, I think that this is going to come down to the very last day. Do you think that means that the Supreme Court is concerned about the political optics and they kind of want to release it and then go on their break? I mean, shouldn't they have done this in a more timely fashion just because the election is coming up so soon?
This is an important decision, and I bet Justice Roberts is writing it. And that's why it's taking so long, because he's very careful with his writing. And hopefully he's taking his time. So I don't think a week, 2 weeks, what's the big deal? It's not a huge issue.
That's right. That's what I don't really understand. If it would have been this week, it wouldn't have been surprising, but next week is surprising. The lawfare effect has been achieved. And I think you're right, Jenna. Is there a scenario here where the Supreme Court decides in a way that results in all charges being dropped? I don't think that's going to happen.
Right. And so we'll have to continue to see how this plays out and, look forward to that decision and how this is going to impact it. But I do think that this isn't going to result in a way that gives either side exactly what they want in terms of the case ultimately being fully dismissed or the DOJ being able to bring this to trial before November. So in just the last 30 seconds we have, Mike, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important case. Justice Roberts, if I'm right, we'll talk next week about it. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm right, then that's why it's taking so long, because he's a very careful writer and he's making sure that this case says exactly what, the court is being very careful here to not be political, right? That's John Roberts' main thing. He doesn't want to be perceived as political. So I think that's all that's going on. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay. Well, we'll see come next week. So Legal Eagles, thanks so much. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. My fellow Americans, we are experiencing instability at every level. Our government lacks leadership, and Bidenomics has been an absolute disaster. The economy is in a fragile state. Inflation has been a consistent issue, and high interest rates have put significant pressure on the real estate market. There have been major bank failures, and many analysts say a stock market correction is likely overdue. We have global conflicts in Europe and the Middle East that have the potential to spread, but gold has soared to record highs even amid the tensions. There are so many reasons that Americans just like you and me should consider investments in gold and silver, and Legacy Precious Metals is the gold standard. I love Legacy Precious Metals because of their zero hassle, education first approach. They can help you roll your traditional IRA into a gold IRA or ship metals directly to your house. Go to legacypminvestments.com, that's legacypminvestments.com, to download their free gold investing guide. I've read it and there is so much valuable information there. Friends, now is not the time to roll the dice with your hard-earned money. Find out about the growth potential that gold offers you. Contact Legacy Precious Metals today and tell them that I sent you. Congressman Bob Good of Virginia is contesting the very narrow election results out of his primary. I had the opportunity on American Family Radio Network to sit down with him exclusively this morning. Listen to this.
Well, thanks for having me, Jenna. We are in this too close to call zone, if you will, and we are still working through that process and will work through that process to make sure we have a fair, accurate election that reflects the integrity, the intent of the legitimate legal voters of Virginia's 5th District. This is a race, though, that never should have happened. Former Speaker McCarthy and his allies spent $10 million that should have been used to defeat Democrats in November, instead to try to defeat one of the most conservative members of Congress, the chair of the House Freedom Caucus, through dishonest ads, distortions, deceit, to try to fool enough people on primary day. My opponent shouldn't have lied to his Senate district voters by saying he wasn't going to run for Congress. We're to believe, Jenna, similar to the presidential race, that an opponent who wouldn't hold events, couldn't hold events, wouldn't debate, couldn't draw a crowd, had very little enthusiasm across the district, somehow mustered over 30,000 votes. And we did receive over 30,000 votes also, despite facing the headwind of all the establishment powers in Washington and across the country, despite the endorsement of the president against me, frankly, a dishonest endorsement where, he said that I fought him for years. Obviously, it's not true. Where he said I've been against him, which is obviously not true. He said I was bad for Virginia and I would stab Virginia in the back if I was reelected after 3.5 years. I don't know how I would do that. And whether or not the president believed that or whether or not he was just saying what others told him, I don't know. But in spite of all those headwinds, we're in a too close to call, each of us over 31,000 votes. This is an opponent, though, that has often said he'll do anything to complete the mission. We know McCarthy would do anything to win. My opponent would do anything to win. They went in all in to get Democrat votes. And Virginia, unfortunately, we have open primaries. So that's why we've had conventions in the past to protect the integrity of Republicans choosing our nominee. But in this case, we have open primaries now. And Democrats can vote. They did outreach to Democrats. We know we got the majority of Republican voters because thousands of Democrats voted trying to defeat the incumbent to elect the weaker candidate in Virginia for the general, which would put, if my opponent were to prevail, it'd put the 5th District in jeopardy in November because tens of thousands of conservatives across the district are furious. Unfortunately, it's weakened the president in Virginia also, as hundreds of thousands of conservatives across the state are angry at him for this endorsement. And it has national implications. This is a blow against the conservative movement. This is a blow for the establishment rhino wing of the Republican Party. So all that to say, Jenna, we've got to do everything we can to battle through this, to make sure that this is a fair and accurate election. And we're to your specific of your question, we're in the canvassing process now that goes through at least today. It may go beyond today. We're doing the first cursory review to see if protocols were followed, procedures, integrity, in terms of the process, and whether or not there's any errors that are glaring that you can see in terms of transposed numbers or something like that. You're opening the mail ballots that were received by noon on Friday that were postmarked by 7 o'clock on Election Day. And we're working through that process. But unfortunately, I can tell you that this process has exposed our vulnerabilities for November. because our system, Jenna, is based on the assumption almost, the way we do things, that everybody's honest, everybody's fair, everybody wants the truth, everybody wants accuracy. It'd be a little bit like running a bank and saying, okay, we're going to have no locks, no safes, no security, no nothing, because everybody's honest and no one would ever steal any money. That's almost the way our election system is right now under Democrat rules that permit the ability for malfeasance. Our largest locality, Lynchburg City, the biggest city in the district, where we won, but we didn't win by the margins we thought we would. We have discovered in the process, and this has been widely publicized over the last few days, that Lynchburg City did not protect their ballot drop box, and they allowed ballots to be stuffed in there until noon on Friday, 3 days after the election finished. They don't have a signature saying how many ballots were retrieved from it. We don't know who opened it when. That was exposed during the canvassing process. Lynchburg should not be certified. All sides of the different campaigns, the city council races, as well as
All right, so for the full interview with Congressman Bob Good, go to American Family Radio Network at afr.net. We'll be right back. You might have heard my friend Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this ridiculous cancel culture, so they want to pass the savings directly onto you by having a $25 extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products, some you may not even know about. So to get the word out, I want to invite you, my listeners, to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2 multi-pack use MyPillows are just $25. MyPillow sandals, which I have and love, are only $25. Their 6-pack towel sets, $25. Brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. And for the first time ever, the premium MyPillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. And orders over $75 will receive free shipping too. This amazing offer won't last long, so go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Jenna, that's Jenna, or call 1-800-564-8475. That's 1-800-564-8475, or go to mypillow.com today, but use the promo code Jenna for all of these great discounts at the $25 extravaganza. Well, the nation is bracing for the first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, with Robert Kennedy Jr. not qualifying, according to CNN. But let's journey back to the 2020 presidential election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump and ask the question whether these candidates are setting up Joe Biden for a very, very minimum threshold. Watch this from Steve Deace talking to Blaze TV host Glenn Beck back in 2020.
Our entire conservative media has glommed on to the Biden dementia thing in the last few months. We have reduced his expectations to ash. If he shows up and is a mouth breather and doesn't scream for the Metamucil in the first 15 minutes, done. Biden win.
There are a lot of people that are not paying attention to the news. They are worried about, he's kind of old and the things are on fire, but they really still believe that he's a moderate and that he's the old Joe Biden. If he shows up as the old Joe Biden and sounds like a moderate, and Donald Trump doesn't dismantle that, you could see a very big spike in the polls for Joe Biden.
Let's welcome in our political panel with Marc Lauder from the America First Policy Institute and Carly Atchison, who is a GOP strategist. So, Marc, are we kind of setting ourselves up for another repeat of 2020, that if Joe Biden just literally walks on stage and seems remotely coherent, everyone would think that he won?
Well, the media is going to declare that he won anyway, regardless of what he does, unless he literally falls over. But here's the thing. They also said, look, after the State of the Union, Joe Biden is there. It's none of these things are true. And then 2 days later, he's tripping all over himself. And here we go again. We're still talking about this. So even if Joe Biden can physically stand for 90 minutes and not stumble and even just stay there, the media will declare him the winner, and then he'll do something strange and bizarre and brain freeze-esque 3 or 4 days later, and we'll be back to talking about this all over again because he keeps doing it. He keeps having these moments over and over and over again. And I think despite what he did at the State of the Union, despite how he does Thursday, nothing's going to change that narrative. It's baked into the cake.
Yeah, so Carly, Ronnie Jackson, who's the former White House doctor, has consistently and persistently called for a cognitive test and also drug testing for Joe Biden heading into Thursday's debate. I think that the American people should know what the cognitive abilities or lack thereof of the two presidential candidates are. And so should the Trump campaign be calling for this more heavily from CNN, who's hosting this debate?
I think they should. I think they have already, but I don't know that that's a winning message, Jenna, to be honest with you. I think that the economy and immigration continue to be voters' #1 concerns. I think the American people can see very clearly Joe Biden is struggling. I think that even with the two 3.5-minute breaks on Thursday evening, it's a high-risk situation for Joe Biden. High reward, as Marc points out, all he has to do is stand there basically, but that really doesn't need that narrative that Joe Biden is cognitively impaired, he's too old. That's already kind of sunk in with voters. They know that. They're a little frustrated by that. I think that instead the Trump campaign, and they've been doing this to their credit, stay disciplined, continue to hammer on Biden's inability to govern successfully, his open border policies, the way that his administration has led this economy further into the ground, talk about the cost of living. If Donald Trump can stay on those messages, I think he can get out of this. But one last point, I'm a little surprised that the Team Trump actually accepted the invitation. This is the first time ever since 1987, when these general election debates have been happening, that a network has gotten the sole discretion over everything. So it used to be an independent nonprofit commission. Now CNN gets the say over everything. And so that is a very interesting setup. And I'm surprised that Team Trump took the invitation, but they must see some sort of reward at the end of the day on this.
Yeah, and my thought personally is that Donald Trump is just so chomping at the bit to debate Joe Biden and kind of have that repeat of 2020 that they would have been willing to go into any field. But to her credit, Caroline Leavitt, who is the spokesperson for the Trump campaign, really handled herself very well on CNN earlier today with Cassie Hunt, and was pointing out that exact bias. And she actually got cut off for her mic. We have this clip. Watch this.
Well, first of all, it takes someone 5 minutes to Google Jake Tapper, Donald Trump, to see that Jake Tapper has consistently,
we're going to stop this interview if you're going to keep attacking my colleagues.
Adolf Hitler.
Ma'am, I'm going to stop this interview if you continue to attack my colleagues. I would like to talk about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who you work for.
Yes.
If you are here to speak on his behalf, I am willing to have this conversation.
I am stating facts that your colleagues have stated in the past.
Okay.
Now,
I'm sorry, guys. We're going to come back out to the panel. Caroline, thank you very much for your time. You are welcome to come back.
Marc, my reaction to that was totally fair game. I mean, she's talking, on CNN, but she's talking about Jake Tapper's rhetoric against Donald Trump in the past, which, as Carly rightly points out, I mean, CNN and their network is not an independent forum here.
No, and anytime you're going to go into any of these debates, I mean, we had this in 2016, we had it in 2020. Obviously, you're going to have it in 2024. The people who are picked to moderate these debates are basically generally left-leaning. And we see when you go up there, you're going to always have to go into that arena and spar not only with your opponent, but with a built-in bias against conservatives, against people who believe in putting America first. And so that's just the way we have it. Obviously, CNN is going to do is going to basically defend their colleagues. And Caroline, she did her job. She's going to attack it, bring it up. And now the narrative all day is people are Googling to see whether it's true or not.
Yes, I mean, she accomplished her job, I think, anyway, regardless of whether Cassie Hunt cut her off, which I think was just absurd and it was so CNN. But Carly, again, journeying back to the first presidential debate of 2020, and Marc and I were working on that campaign at the time. I remember watching that debate thinking that coming off of COVID and the daily COVID press conferences that then President Trump was holding, he wasn't really debate prepping, and it came off to me like he handled it like another press conference. And Trump, at least according to reports, is not really prepping for debate, but Joe Biden is spending all week at Camp David. Do you think that that is wise of President Trump, or what would you advise him going into Thursday?
Oh, I have to give Caroline credit. I mean, it was just absolutely brilliant to let Cassie fly off the handle and her to keep her intonation and everything super calm. So got to give her credit there. As far as debate prep, Donald Trump is Donald Trump. That's why people love him. I will say that at times Donald Trump can be his own worst enemy and say something perhaps that is off script and gets clipped and out there. But frankly, I could make the argument that what they're doing is brilliant. I mean, Donald Trump is somebody who has successfully painted himself as the outsider. The establishment is against him. The media is against him. If he goes on Thursday night and does essentially what Caroline Leavitt just did with Cassie Hunt, that's success right there, because people remember Donald Trump as the one who was able to take on the media, fake news CNN, all of that. And so if they walk out of there able to say, look, I'm the outsider, everybody's against me, that plays into what the weaponization of the justice system is doing to the former president. They could walk away with a big communications victory. And sometimes that's enough. The one thing, too, I just want to call out CNN, because they right now have some of the lowest viewership they've ever had since the early 90s. I think I saw a statistic that said, according to Nielsen, less than 100,000 people tune into CNN on prime time. And so I don't know how many people are going to be tuning into the debate. But again, if you can get a couple clips, get a couple moments, if they can walk away with the narrative that he continues to be the outsider, people are against him, that's a win for the Trump campaign.
Yeah, and I think that's wise to say that not everybody's going to be watching the full 90-minute debate. A lot of people, especially younger voters, are just going to see clips maybe on President Trump's TikTok, some of those things. So they're going to want to have some of those moments that are more geared toward the short clips than they are maybe necessarily concerned about the overall 90 minutes. But we're going to hold our political panel to the next segment and talk about the VP pick right after this. Let's welcome back in our political panel, Carly Atchison and Marc Lauder. And so let's turn to the VP pick for Donald Trump. He has said now to reporters that he's made his selection and that individual will be at the debate on Thursday, but that person doesn't even know that they've been selected yet. So Marc, you've worked for Trump for a long time. You're very familiar with how he handles this kind of thing. I mean, to me, it almost seems apprentice style, but to me, I think that this election, almost more than any other, the VP actually matters, and it does for Joe Biden as well, because on both sides, there's a very real possibility, just given the age of the candidates, that the vice president could actually be in the position to have to take over. I definitely don't want Kamala Harris anywhere near the Oval Office. So how important is this VP pick just from a legacy and potential POTUS perspective?
Well, you always go into these picks on picking someone that you could see succeeding you if that moment occurred tragically. And so that's always in the back of their minds. But look, nobody goes into the polls and says, I'm voting for blank for vice president. You always vote for the top of the ticket, regardless of party. Now, I do think Kamala Harris costs Joe Biden votes because she's just that bad. And she's even more unpopular than him. And he's the most unpopular president in history in the last 70 years that's seeking re-election. For Trump, I think it's what do you bring to the table? I think it always comes back to what do you add to the campaign that I think I need or I want more of? And so I think he'll make that selection based on that. And of course, it will be someone he can work with in the White House. And should that need arise, could step in and serve as president if called to do so.
Yeah, so Carly, we've heard a lot of different names floated that are supposedly on his VP shortlist. I mean, that includes Governor Doug Burgum, Senator J.D. Vance, Vivek Ramaswamy, who was actually a primary challenger, interestingly, Governor Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio, Governor Sarah Sanders. So out of this, and even Tulsi Gabbard as well. So out of kind of this wide field, I think he has a lot of people to pick from. Who do you see as the best choice for Trump?
I mean, the best choice in terms of who's the most successful is definitely Ron DeSantis, but having worked for him, I know for a fact that he would never accept something like that. He's doing a great job in Florida as governor, and he's an executive. So I don't think the vice presidential slot suits him very much. But here's what I'll say. I think that a lot of times candidates, political campaigns, they look at the vice presidential nominee as somebody who could maybe earn them a couple news stories. Maybe you get 1 or 2 cycles out of it. Maybe it's something like a political weapon who can help us unlock a new demographic like Joe Biden thought Kamala Harris could do, which to Marc's point, that completely backfired. But I think there's one qualification, and I hope that both candidates, well, I know Joe Biden's not, but hopefully the Trump campaign is looking at who is the best person to step in and fulfill the duties of president if there is a case in which President Trump cannot. That is really the only thing that matters. We've gotten so far away from that, and now it's this political game. But really, at the end of the day, you need somebody who is able to step in should something happen to the president. I think I'm partial to governors, having worked for a few in my time. I think that they're executives and can step in easily. But at the same time, the only person who knows who Donald Trump is going to pick is Donald Trump. And so the speculation, I think the team loves it. It's more media for them. And so we'll see what happens on Thursday if, in fact, his pick is revealed there or if it's at Milwaukee.
Yeah, and it might be revealed there. I mean, that would make for a lot of interesting headlines, regardless of the rest of the clash of the debate, Marc Lauder. So, I mean, do you think that this is going to be revealed on Thursday? And I'll just go on record and say, I love Tulsi Gabbard as a pick, and I also love Governor Sarah Sanders as a pick, because I think it's really important to have a strong female to contrast Kamala Harris. And even though we shouldn't be playing identity politics, we kind of do in the media, but also both of those picks would be excellent spokespersons, which you and I both know that's one of the key indicators that Trump would like in a second. So what do you think about Thursday, and who's your pick?
Well, I don't think it'll be Thursday because obviously you want to play this out as long as possible. I will also tell you that vice presidential nominees aren't cheap. They require a lot of staff. They require an airplane. They require things that cost money. So why not delay it and do it right before the convention? That's what happened in 2016 when he selected then Governor Pence to be his nominee. It was the weekend before the convention, and then you go to the convention and seal the deal. So that's the timeline I would expect him to do. And when it comes to who he picks, obviously there's so many great names out there. I'm not going to say who my personal favorite is. I'll leave that to the president. But I think, we've got such a great deep bench. And that's one of the strengths of this movement is we've got a number of people, and really no one can step forward and fill in for Joe and Kamala because they're just that bad.
Yeah, I mean, and anyone on that list would be far superior to Kamala Harris, let's be honest. The political panel, thanks so much. That's all the time we have for Jenna Ellis tonight. Make it a great night.